Hello.
Hi, Wynford. Thank you so much for joining us on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, great.
Do you want to explain a bit more about what you do and your background?
Yeah, but my story starts quite a few years ago. I've got 4 children, and the oldest of my 4 children went to the same school as the others, had the same amazing teachers as the others, but she couldn't learn.
Okay.
And as she went through school, this started to affect her emotions and her feelings about herself, as you can imagine. So in her teen years, she became very depressed. Now, meanwhile, I was running lots of businesses and having a great time, except I'd got a daughter that couldn't learn. And then one day she attempted to take her life.
Oh no, I'm so sorry to hear that.
And my younger daughter rang me up to tell me I was 2 hours away from home. And on that journey, that 2-hour journey to the hospital, I didn't know if she was going to live. All I knew was that all of the energy I was putting into running businesses, all of the money and time and determination, I'd got to direct towards finding out why Susie couldn't learn. And so, mercifully, she lived.
Yeah, so glad to hear that.
But in that journey, my life was changed. So it took a while to sell my businesses and start the research. So my research started many years ago, 25 years ago. And what I discovered was that there's amazing pieces of neurological research that could transform people's lives, but it's not reaching the people that need it.
Yeah.
And so I was blessed with being introduced to some incredible neuroscientists. And one of those became Professor Rod Nicholson, became a mentor to me for the last 25 years. And he understands the long words that I don't. He doesn't think in words less than 16 letters.
Wow.
And I don't think in words bigger than 6 letters. So he helped me with the neuroscience. And that journey has just been incredible. The people I've met, the neuroscientists I've met. And it's almost like all the pieces of jigsaw have been there in neuroscience.
Yeah.
But nobody done the jigsaw.
Yeah.
I couldn't do what the neuroscientists do, but I'm good at doing the jigsaw, especially when I'm driven by the fact I wanted and still want my daughter to live and be happy, which means she has to learn and be able to read and write and behave and socialise and so on and so on and so on. So I had a very strong driver behind me, and it's just been an incredible journey, and that journey is still going on. We're changing a lot of lives, but there's millions we're not reaching yet.
So what would you say is your mission then?
Well, one of the important missions I've got is for people to think very differently about all mental health issues. Mm-hmm. We fully understand physical health.
Yeah.
We know that if you exercise properly and you eat properly, you get stronger.
Yeah.
The same is actually true of the brain, but we don't think like that. We assume that we have a certain level of intelligence and we have to live with that. And if anything goes wrong, we take drugs or we go to therapy or something to get it back to where it was.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks about the fact that if you exercise the brain in the right way, and also if you need to have the right nutrients, then you can take your mental capacity to greater levels. You can increase your mental capacity, you can increase your mental strength and robustness and resilience, and you can start to feel on top of whatever life is throwing at you. We don't think about that as being a possibility, yet it's absolutely a possibility. So I've spent my time putting together programs that folk can use at home to transform their mental capacity and mental strength. So whether it's ADHD, whether it's anxiety or depression or bipolar or autism or whatever it is that's limiting you, there are things you can do to make more connections in the brain. So to answer your question specifically, my mission is to get people to realize you can increase mental strength. And for huge numbers, it's life-changing.
That sounds amazing. How do you do that then? You mentioned you have a number of programs helping children with ADHD, bipolar, increasing learning. How do you do that then? How do you get it to everyone's homes? Well,
the brain doesn't change significantly unless there's neuroplasticity.
Okay, yeah.
If you want to create lasting change...
Do you want to just explain what neuroplasticity is?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, neuroplasticity is the brain having all of the nutrients and, in fact, the motivation, the ability to create vital new connections. When we take medication for any mental health issue, we're temporarily changing the chemicals in the brain. We are not permanently changing the connections in the brain.
Okay.
And until the possibility of creating neuroplasticity was understood, the whole concept of making more connections, having a bigger brain, was something that we didn't have the tools for. But we do now. Creating neuroplasticity is possible at any age. When we're young, when we're babies, and up until in our teens, we've got a huge amount of neuroplasticity. We are changing, we are developing a lot.
Yeah, we learn a lot of skills.
We do. And typically, people don't change much after teenage. Whatever character they have established during teenage, that's what they're going to have to live with the rest of their life. But if you stimulate the brain in the right way, and you do that using exercises, specific, very carefully chosen exercises, then you can create neuroplasticity, and then you can do things to increase your mental capacity. And it's the whole process is so exciting. Originally, when I started this research, I thought that beyond teenage we wouldn't be able to do much with people. Then we discovered, actually people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And actually I was in Southampton, where you're from, and giving a talk one day, and a lady from the second row of the audience, an elderly lady, came up to me and she said, "I want to read and write before I die."
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I said, "Well, this is an exercise program and I'm worried about you hurting yourself." "I know what you're worried about," she said, "but I am more hurt every day because I can't do the things that other people find easy.
Yeah.
Will you let me do it?" I couldn't say no.
Yeah.
4 months later, she was on breakfast television showing people the first letter she'd written in her life, and it was to her sister.
Oh, that's amazing.
Well, two years later,
her
daughter rang me up because her daughter had an autistic son.
Yeah.
And put the son through my program, and she wanted to update me. And she was very excited about what's happening to her son. And then she said, "Do you remember my mother?" I said, "Of course, how is she?"
Yeah.
She's reading and writing in 3 languages.
Oh, wow.
At the age of 84. So that, for me, was a huge lesson. It is possible to create neuroplasticity, create the ability to make really important major connections in the brain at any age. The question is exactly how do you do that, because it's not any old exercise. You actually have to have a combination of exercises.
Okay.
Your brain is very, very different to mine.
Yeah, of course, we're different people. Yeah.
And so every brain actually needs its own program. So we had to do a lot of work. Initially we worked with 45,000 people through a large number of clinics, collecting research data on what type of exercise, what level of stimulation creates the necessary changes in the brain.
Yeah.
And so having got all of that research data, that was amazing. We were able to come up with totally personalized programs. So we now feed that through AI. So the exercises are only actually 10 minutes a day. Twice a day takes you 20 minutes, but most people seem to do it once a day. And in just a few months, you can create lasting change to the key parts of your brain that make all the difference to your mental capacity.
That sounds amazing. So if I just repeat back what you said, so you're on a mission to help people increase their mental capacity.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether that's neurotypical people who don't really have many difficulties, or people who have anxiety, depression, ADHD, struggling to learn, children with autism who are again struggling to learn and meet their milestones. You're on a mission to help them.
Yes.
You funded all this research over the last 20 years, did you say?
25 years.
25 years. And you've been able to really prove that things are not just a standstill. You can change your brain.
Exactly.
And make new connections and learn new skills.
Absolutely. So you mentioned neurotypical. One of many things that have shocked us is that we had some coming with, say, reading or attention or ADHD issues to us, and they were already successful athletes.
Okay.
And
then
they discovered that they got even better at their sport. And many of them were professionals, some of them very famous, and they went public with it, saying they got even better at their sport.
Yeah.
So it isn't restricted to those that have got limitations because of neurodiversity.
Yeah.
Almost anybody can increase their mental capacity at any age. The amazing Medicare system in America is now using my program for seniors to help them retain, recover their balance, their memory, their confidence in older age. So the word is spreading.
That's good.
But there's still millions that haven't got it. There's still millions suffering with autism.
Yes.
As you know, and I love the work. I love the work you're doing.
Thank you.
With autism. You're an absolute genius at it. And,
thank you.
And an inspiration. Because one of the problems is that many families assume that our education system and our health system is going to find every problem my child has and sort it out.
Yeah.
Well, for some reason it takes decades sometimes for important breakthroughs to reach the front line and end up reaching all sorts of families. So you're what I'd call a warrior parent. Not a worrier, a warrior parent.
Oh, warrior. Okay, warrior parent.
Warrior.
Okay, yeah.
Not a worrier, a warrior parent.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sure you've done a lot of worrying. But your determination to look after your child meant that you would stop at absolutely nothing to find out what it was going to take so your child was nurtured and developed and was able to have the fullest life. So that's one type of parent. There's warrior parents. They don't abdicate, say, oh, the school will sort it out, or the health service will sort it out. They say, my child is my job. I'm going to maximise the quality of life my child is going to have, which means I maximise the potential. So when we see neurodiversity in all of the many forms, I don't see problems now. I see a big flag saying, huge potential just waiting to be discovered. But sadly, it's only the warrior parents that take the... part of my mission is to make a day, see a day, when the authorities tear up all of the rule books, all of the processes and systems they use to evaluate and assess children's developmental needs, and say, let's look at the science as it is now. We shouldn't be diagnosing children with anything unless we've fully exploited, is there some development I can drive? So that the symptoms this child has are dissipated as much as possible before I do the diagnosis. We do the diagnosis on symptoms without ever looking at, can I help this child develop further? So that's what my program is about, is maximising the development, optimising the speed of development. And we do it with neuroplasticity, we do it with exercise. The length of time varies for I'd say relatively simple things like reading issues, which usually comes back to eye tracking. I know phonics is crucial. I've yet to find a child that hasn't gotten good phonics by the age of 7 or 8. What they need after that is smooth eye tracking, so reading is easy. That only takes a few weeks, 10 minutes a day for a few weeks. ADHD can take a little bit longer, but not much. Autism can take quite a bit longer, because with autism there's been stunted development of the cerebellum. That's it's smaller.
The brain's brain.
The brain is, thank you.
My audience should hopefully know what the cerebellum is. But just in case they don't, do you want to explain that?
Yes, the cerebellum has been totally misunderstood. It's a bit of the brain. It's the junction box that puts the major links between different parts of the brain together. It also connects different parts of the brain with different parts of our body. So it's the master junction box. For many years, everyone thought that the cerebellum was just about coordinating our balance and movement of our gross motor skills. And then a famous professor from Harvard, Jeremy Schwarman, he came along and he said, no, it's doing an awful lot more than that. It's coordinating just about everything. And he showed that around about 75% of all of our brain cells are in the cerebellum. It's hugely important. So when I had that issue with my daughter, I went to see Professor Rod Nicholson, and he pointed me to the cerebellum, and I was saying to him, I don't want to use drugs, nothing against drugs, but I want to use something natural if possible. How do I permanently change the cerebellum? And he said, well, nobody's done it, but exercise probably will if you do it long enough. That's all he said. And I went off and I took on hundreds of people and funded loads of clinics and had what became an awful lot of fun.
That's great.
Within months, I was watching my daughter start to read.
Oh wow!
And
how old was she then?
She was in her early 20s then.
Oh wow!
And
you did it.
And you imagine the thrill.
I know the thrill, because you work so hard to help your child learn something, and then when they're able to, you can't contain yourself. You're so happy. You're overjoyed.
Well done for what you've done.
Thank you.
And what you've done needs to reach millions. Your approach has been different to mine, but boy, are the whole ideas synergistic.
Absolutely agree.
Absolutely synergistic. So, but we started talking about different types of parents. You are a warrior parent.
Thank you.
If there's anyone listening now that's a warrior parent, they'll relate to you. But there's other types. Sometimes with autism, you get parents who say, oh, my child is perfect, don't you try and change him. Well, okay, if that's what you feel, but you actually will be watching your child struggling, going through life. As parents, I believe we have an obligation to nurture them, to maximise the potential of their brain. We get them to eat right, we get them to exercise, we teach them all sorts of things about the world and what they're going to have to face in their life. Why don't we develop their brain as well? Because if you can get rid of some of the symptoms that are holding them back.
Like the anxiety. That's the big one for autism, or aggression. There's a lot of, so there's a lot of children who, they're able to meet some of their milestones, but the big thing that's holding them back from really thriving in public life is the anxiety about being in public spaces.
Yeah. Well, shall I give you my take on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Anxiety comes from trauma. I use the word trauma generally. Whenever the brain can't predict an outcome of something, it is trauma to the brain. Okay. So lots of things happen that we wouldn't call trauma, but to me, if it's going to affect the development of the brain, it is trauma.
Yeah.
So every child that I've ever studied, or adult for that matter, that has degrees of autism, there was always trauma at some point in their life. In other words, the brain didn't have the inherent knowledge to know what was going to happen next. Yeah. And various things happen, some of them positive and some of them negative. So one of the things that trauma does early on, if it takes place early on, is it stunts the development of the cerebellum. In other words, the cerebellum isn't able to make the automatic processes that we rely on to make life easy.
Yeah.
Whether that's movement, so we're clumsy or not clumsy, whether it's social skills, so we're socially clumsy or not clumsy, whether it's having the mental capacity to avoid running out of space so you lose emotional control. All of these things happen. And if ever you've got time, I'd love to go into the detail of exactly how the cerebellum is involved with all that, because it really is exciting stuff. But when the cerebellum is stunted in its development, you can assume that some skills they don't become a natural at.
Yeah.
And when that is the case, that element of their life is going to be hard work forever. It might affect their jobs, it might affect relationships, might affect all sorts of things. It's certainly going to be making their brain working hard. So trauma stunts the development of the cerebellum. It also creates triggers, and those triggers go off at all sorts of times. The idea of a trigger in the brain is actually to save our lives, but 99.9% of the time the alarm goes off. It puts you into a heightened state of anxiety, fight or flight.
Yeah.
Or it can be phobias. It can just be a heightened state of alertness where you're jumpy and you're responsive. So there's various levels of impact of trauma. But if you're living with triggers, they don't go away unless you do something specific, and we can come back to that because there are specific things you can do now to eliminate the triggers. So that's another thing that happens, a child that's traumatized early. But a third thing is, because their brain is confused, hasn't been taught subliminally what it's got to cope with, it becomes a creative brain. It starts to think outside the box. It starts to look for solutions because it hasn't got a solution built into it. And so often, for instance, with ADHD, you have people that think outside the box. They solve problems that other people can't solve. They become hyper-focused. So all of these symptoms can be created, and I regard those as positive symptoms, by the way.
Yeah.
Very positive. They can be created by the very triggers that create also the negative aspects. So there's some good sides, and we should focus more and more on those, and there's some negative sides which we can now do things to reduce the impact of.
So what you said is fascinating. So I just want to bring it back to the cerebellum. So would you say that because for like autistic children or neurodiverse people, they have a smaller cerebellum because that growth has been stunted by its early trauma, whatever that may be, whether parents are able to identify what their trauma is or not. That is why a lot of people who are neurodiverse have more than one condition. So you find a lot of people who have dyspraxia and dyslexia and have autism. So they've got more than one neurodiverse condition because you're saying it all relates back to a cerebellum.
It does relate back to the cerebellum.
Yeah.
When the cerebellum is itself not fully developed, certain key skills, in other words, skills we need all of the time, are not fully developed, which means there's lack of automaticity. When you've got that, your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, has to help out. They call it conscious compensation. So, for instance, someone that struggles with auditory processing, when they're listening, you see an extra cog work and they have to work really hard at it, and then 10 minutes down the line they're out the window or they're fiddling with something, because for them, listening is very, very hard work. When that happens, you've got an awful lot of activity happening in your thinking brain that should be happening up in the cortex. Up here, you've got unlimited capacity, effectively. Here, you've got very limited capacity. When this gets full, and if it's full of stuff that shouldn't be there, you can run out of mental capacity to control your emotions.
Oh, that's why autistic children will have a lot of emotional outbursts.
Exactly. So this is where our executive function is. So this is where you think, where you make decisions, where you rationalize things and put them in perspective. It's where you control your emotions. It's where your executive functions are. So control of emotions, control of attention, control of impulsivity, inhibitory control.
Yeah, all things that autistic children struggle with.
They're all caused because overload here and the executive functions can't operate. And this is full because the cerebellum hasn't finished off the social skills, the movement and coordination skills, spatial awareness, or the speech skill.
Verbal fluency.
Verbal fluency. So whatever everyday skill, eye tracking, whatever everyday skill isn't fully developed, help is needed here in the prefrontal cortex, causing overload, impacting the executive functions. So by studying the cerebellum and the impact it has on the prefrontal cortex, you can explain all of the common symptoms of autism, in fact of neurodiversity generally.
This might be a question that I would be really interested in what your answer is. So you know there's some autistic children who have hyperlexia?
Yes.
Yeah, where they can just read without being taught. I have met parents who've said their children have hyperlexia and learnt to read before they even started school. How would you is that also explained by the cerebellum?
Yes. The trauma that creates the problem in the first place, that stunts the development of the cerebellum, it makes the cerebellum eccentric. In other words, some parts will be significantly underdeveloped and other parts will be significantly overdeveloped. So everything we learn is done by the cerebellum. And there's some really exciting feedback loops and all sorts of things. The way the cerebellum learns turns what you're thinking about into something that ends up as a fully automatized program, bug-free, up in your cortex, so you can do things without thinking. You become a natural at them. So it's that eccentricity that creates the ability to learn some things incredibly fast and take in information incredibly fast. Some autistic children can look at a scene, a complicated scene, and replicate it. That's because their processing for some aspects are incredibly fast. So that early trauma can produce limitations.
And
can produce genius. I call it genius. It's incredible. But then what we have in society, what we have in the majority of our school systems is the focus is on their limitations. Well, let's focus on their genius. ADHD is classic. I co-own some private schools, and getting teachers to fully understand the potential that exists in these children is really, really important.
I've got a few siblings in my family who have ADHD and they are so creative. So creative. And my own son, he has autism, but his visual memory and long-term memory is amazing. It's actually really amazing.
Well, when you develop the cerebellum, and you can do that with exercises, 10 minutes a day for typically a few months, the more significant the autism is, the longer that might take. Then you develop the cerebellum and the ability to improve, make more natural those skills that they're currently underdeveloped.
And you keep all the good parts.
You keep the upside and you dramatically reduce the downside. So coming back to parents, because I'm just so impressed with your warrior parent character, and I nothing but respect for you, and thank you for the book you gave me. It's a book every person with any neurodiversity ought to read. They really must.
Thank you, Wynford. I put a lot of heart and soul and research into it.
But you're a warrior parent. If any of your listeners happen to be those parents that are abdicators, in other words, they assume that the local authority through the education department or the health system through their private doctor and psychiatrist and so on, they assume that they are going to find and solve the limitations in your child. Right now, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. I live to see a day when all of our services fully see and understand and embrace the science that now exists.
Absolutely.
That can transform not just the lives of the individuals, but as you know, the whole family.
The whole family changes. It's all that stress just gets lifted from the family. It's actually, that's what's so amazing about working with families. You can see the effect it has on all the siblings, on all the extended family. It's great.
So if you're an abdicator, try and become a warrior parent, because that could transform your child. If you're one that says there's nothing wrong, my child with autism is perfect, well, I respect that, and that's a great way of coping with it. But also see if there's something you can do to help your child have a quality of life. And if you're a warrior parent, congratulations. I hold my hat up to you.
What I find there's a lot of people who are warrior parents, because most parents, I would say, like a lot of them, the ones I meet as well, they are warrior parents. They'll do anything for their child, but what they think they need to be doing is chasing the NHS for appointments and for assessments, and also or chasing their school for appointments and assessments and extra support, and fighting so much for EHCP or other services like that, but they won't they don't use that warrior parent to believe in themselves to do a program at home.
Well, we tend to assume that the government is going to do the right thing, that the health authority know everything and they're going to... I'm afraid some of these breakthroughs take decades to get through the whole academic system before it reaches the trainees and so on. And then doctors go right through their lives. They keep on learning a bit, but they don't fundamentally relearn. And we're talking about something that's only really emerged in the last 25 to 30 years.
Yeah.
And that's actually quite a short timescale. It's taking longer than it should by a long way. And if you've got a child at school or that's young, you want answers now. You want solutions now.
Yeah, you don't want them to have a bad childhood or difficulties or wait till teenagehood to solve things. Everything just gets worse there.
And if you're at a point when you're thinking of getting your child diagnosed, I'd say just pause. Yeah. Just pause and evaluate, could this be a developmental issue that we can do something about?
Yeah.
Because if it is, it's far better to go through that process and get the child developed to the max and then say, what symptoms are left? You know, is there anything that we really should diagnose? Because diagnosis is a bit like a tattoo across the forehead. It never goes away. And people look at autism, they look at ADHD, all they see is the negative instead of the huge potential.
So I know that's one thing you really believe in, that we label our children too much.
Too easily.
Too easily.
Yeah, I'm not against labelling. Sometimes parents need an explanation and schools need to understand what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
But it's a big mistake to label a child before that child's potential has been pursued to the nth degree.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in the UK at least, a lot of people will say, okay, we've been fighting to get a diagnosis for our child. Yeah. It's taken 4 years on the waiting list, or 3 years on the waiting list, and 2 years on the waiting list. But what they don't realise is, in the UK, the diagnosis is just the end of the road, or for support.
You're written off after the diagnosis.
You're written off after. You're written off. And what you were saying before about how it does take decades for the latest research to feed back down to therapists. Yeah. When I started my program with my own son, I was learning all about neuroplasticity. I remember having a conversation with my son's occupational therapist, and I was like, okay, what about neuroplasticity? Like, we can change things for him. And she was like, oh, neuroplasticity, that's for stroke victims. And I was like, oh, she doesn't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's terrible.
Yeah, but I decided after my first meeting that I wasn't going to leave it to them.
Well, look, there's a lot of parents listening to you right now. They may not have had your level of intelligence to be able to study and research and
my dental
resources
school background.
Yes, you've had huge. So that's why I'm saying read your book.
Thank you.
Because there is all of the essence of everything you've been able to discover and distill. You've got a very inquisitive mind.
Thank you.
You've got a huge brain to make connections in there, and I think you're laying a path that will transform millions of lives. So
I really hope so. I see the effects of autism on the child. I see the effects on the family, in the classroom, and I just look at it thinking, it doesn't have to be like this. There's something you can do at home. That's why I feel like saying it to parents, but then trying to convince them because they haven't done the 10,000 hours of research that I've done. So, but yeah, hopefully the message does get to as many parents as possible, and with the help of this book.
And start by focusing on the potential.
Yeah.
If you've got neurodiversity, think of it as a huge opportunity. You've probably got a very bright child.
Yeah. But I feel like when I was taking my son to his appointments, when I speak to so many parents, they can see like moments of brilliance in their child, and it just fills them with so much joy, and they can see it, and then they're desperate to tell that, to convince healthcare professionals and teachers who don't look as closely and have that connection with that child. Yeah. And they do feel like their child's been written off, but they just don't know where to turn.
Well, when I speak to teachers, I ask them, how much training did you get on neurodiversity?
Yeah.
They'll say, half a day.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, what proportion of your one-to-one time do you spend with children that need support? Yeah. Well, they say, 80% of it is with neurodiverse children. So 80% of their one-to-one time is spent on a topic they're given half a day's training on.
Yeah.
Doesn't that need a major rethink?
Yeah.
I'm meeting more and more teachers who are wanting to study themselves, and we've got training programs for them so they can learn about the latest neuroscience of neurodiversity, and it's a massive eye-opener.
Yeah.
The cost of education, the problems in education are huge. If the neuroscience that's now known could get through to the education department, they need to clear out some of the advisors that are 50 years out of date with where neuroscience has moved.
Yeah.
if we could completely rethink how we approach these children, it would transform millions of lives. It would actually transform the economy.
Yeah, you're right.
But I can't get beyond the human level. For the child and for the family, we need to get to them urgently.
I cannot agree with you more. One question I would like your take on is, would you say that neurodiversity and neurodiverse conditions are increasing in society? And if so, why?
It certainly seems like, and some argue, it's because we've got more assessments available. No, as you were saying earlier, I keep on coming across families that wait 3, 4, 5 years for a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And the diagnosis is really an excuse to write them off all too often.
Absolutely.
So I just want a complete rethink on the whole process. Is it increasing? Yes, it is. Why? Are you going to ask why? That I wouldn't like to judge, but I tend to think processed food is a big problem.
Yeah.
And if you look at the graphs of how processed food has increased and you look at how neurodiversity has increased, they seem to follow a very similar trend.
Yeah, that's why gut health is such a big part of my program. It's such a big part of my program. So thank you so much, Wynford. Is there anything else you want to share?
No, just to encourage parents, don't be put off. If your child is at school, if you've taken your child to the medical profession, and I'm a big fan of doctors and so on, but don't be put off by the fact they haven't got anything to suggest that will help your child fundamentally increase mental capacity. That possibility exists. There is huge hope out there. Your book is full of hope.
Thank you.
And thank you for including my program in it.
Yeah.
We've got wonderful research. It's spreading. There's more and more neuroscientists gathering around wanting to join my scientific advisory board. And so I've got great hope for the future that there's going to be a breakthrough soon. There's going to be a tsunami of hope reaching those families soon. Don't give up hope.
Wynford, do you want to just explain where people can find you and what the name of your program is?
Yeah, my company is Zing Performance Limited. The programs are all things you can do at home. You don't have to go to clinics and see therapists and so on. They're all things you can do at home, or some schools are beginning to do it now, which is awesome. Yeah. So look up Zing Performance, Zing, zingperformance.com, and you'll find all sorts of assessment tools there that you'll find useful.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much, Wynford.
My pleasure, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.